He thought the courtroom would witness a simple humiliation that morning, but before the hour was over, it would witness the collapse of a man who believed power made him untouchable. Judge Franklin Pierce adjusted the cuff of his black robe as sunlight poured through the tall courthouse windows and stretched across the polished marble floor. The room already carried the heavy silence of anticipation, the kind that settled when people expected someone to be embarrassed in public. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff opened the side door and called the next case. Emma Lawson stepped inside wearing a modest gray coat, low heels, and carrying a worn leather folder against her chest. She did not look like someone who belonged at the center of a legal spectacle. She looked like a woman who had stopped by on her way to teach a morning class. A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. One man near the back smirked. Another leaned forward as if eager for entertainment. Judge Pierce noticed every reaction and let a faint smile touch the corner of his mouth. This was exactly the atmosphere he wanted. Emma moved quietly to the defendant's table and set down her folder with careful hands. She glanced once around the room, then toward the bench where Pierce sat above everyone like a monument built from ego and oak wood. His reputation filled the county. He was known for sharp words, long lectures, and a habit of making ordinary citizens feel 2 inches tall. Many accepted it as the price of authority. Emma had seen men like him before. Men who mistook position for character. "Ms. Lawson," Pierce said, drawing out her name with theatrical patience. "You stand before this court regarding failure to appear and contempt." Murmurs floated through the room. Emma's eyes narrowed for half a second, then softened again. "Your Honor," she said evenly. "I paid the original citation online 3 weeks ago." Pierce leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "How convenient." A few scattered chuckles answered him. "Do you have any legal training, Ms. Lawson? Or are you simply guessing how these matters work?" More laughter, low and mean. Emma did not react. She only opened her folder and removed a single sheet of paper. Her calm unsettled people more than anger would have. "I brought the payment confirmation," she said. Pierce did not ask to see it. Instead, he glanced toward the gallery, enjoying the moment the way some men enjoyed applause. "This court functions on evidence, procedure, and competence," he said. "Not assumptions brought in a handbag." The room laughed louder now. Even the clerk looked down to hide a smile. Emma slowly placed the paper back inside her folder. Her posture never changed. Somewhere in the back row, a woman stopped smiling and began watching more carefully. Pierce tapped his gavel once, savoring the echo. "Since you appear determined to challenge the court, perhaps you'd like to explain why official records state you ignored a lawful summons." He believed pressure would crack her voice, redden her face, make her stumble. That was how these scenes usually ended. But Emma simply lifted her chin and met his eyes for the first time. There was no fear in them, only patience. The air in the courtroom shifted so subtly most people missed it. "I'd be happy to explain," she said. Her tone was warm, precise, and strangely familiar to anyone who had ever heard real authority speak softly. Judge Pierce's smile faded by a fraction. The marble floors seemed to hold their breath. Because in that instant, the woman he thought was easy prey stopped looking ordinary at all. Judge Franklin Pierce leaned forward as if granting a child permission to speak. "Then by all means, Ms. Lawson," he said, smoothing the edge of the docket with deliberate calm. "Explain yourself." The gallery settled into eager silence. They expected excuses, confusion, perhaps tears. What they received instead was composure so steady it made the room feel suddenly smaller. Emma opened her folder and removed 3 neatly clipped documents, placing them in a straight line on the defense table. "The first page is my payment receipt," she said, "processed at 8:14 p.m. on the 12th of last month. The second is the confirmation email sent by the county system. The third is a bank statement showing the withdrawal." Her voice carried without strain. No trembling, no rush. The clerk glanced up, then back down again. Pierce barely looked at the papers. "Anyone can print documents," he said. "That proves very little." Emma nodded once, as if she had expected nothing better. Then perhaps the court would prefer metadata, transaction codes, and server timestamps. A hush fell across the courtroom. The clerk's pen stopped moving. Pierce shifted in his chair. "You seem unusually familiar with procedure for a schoolteacher," he said. Emma answered gently, "I am familiar with records that matter." The sentence landed harder than volume ever could. A man in the back row straightened in his seat. Pierce tapped his gavel once. "This is not a lecture hall, Ms. Lawson." "No, Your Honor," Emma replied. "If it were, facts would likely receive a warmer welcome." A sharp breath moved through the gallery. Even the bailiff looked down to hide a reaction. Pierce's jaw tightened. He had intended amusement. He was beginning to receive resistance. "You were also charged with failure to appear for a summons dated 2 weeks ago," he said. "Would you like to deny receiving that as well?" Emma slid another sheet forward. "I would like to note that the summons was issued 3 days after the case had already been marked resolved in the public portal." She paused, letting the words settle. "And mailed to an address I have never lived at." Now the clerk looked fully alarmed. Pierce turned sharply toward the bench computer, then back to Emma. "Administrative errors happen." "Of course they do," Emma said, "though they rarely generate contempt charges against citizens who were never notified." The room went silent. The spectators who had come for humiliation were no longer certain who the target was. Pierce cleared his throat and adopted the tone he used when trying to regain ground through force of posture alone. "You are making serious implications." "I am stating timelines," Emma replied. "Implications are what people draw when timelines do not make sense." The words struck like clean glass. Pierce looked toward the clerk, whose face had gone pale. "Mr. Collins," the judge said coldly, "verify the file." The clerk's fingers fumbled over the keyboard. Seconds stretched. The sound of keys clicking echoed across the chamber like tiny warnings. "Your Honor," Collins said at last, voice thin, "the payment appears to have been received on the 12th. Pierce froze mid-motion. "And the summons?" Collins swallowed. "Generated afterward." A murmur rippled through the room. Emma did not smile. She only stood there with hands folded, as if patience had always been her strongest argument. Pierce felt control slipping and reached for the one tool men like him always reached for when exposed. "Enough," he snapped. "This court will recess for 10 minutes. But before he could rise, Emma lifted one final document. "Before we recess," she said softly, "there is also the matter of who manually edited the case status at 7:42 a.m. yesterday." The clerk's face drained of color. Judge Pierce stared at her as though seeing her clearly for the first time. And for the first time that morning, the man on the bench looked worried. Judge Franklin Pierce kept one hand on the arm of his chair, as if polished wood could steady what was happening around him. The confidence that had filled the courtroom minutes earlier had thinned into something brittle. "This hearing is in recess," he repeated, louder now. But no one moved. The gallery remained seated. The clerk remained frozen at his desk. Even the bailiff hesitated, sensing that authority spoken without control was only noise. Emma Lawson lowered the document back into her folder with calm precision. "Of course, Your Honor," she said, "though the timestamp will remain the same after 10 minutes. A nervous ripple moved through the room. Pierce turned sharply toward the clerk. "Mr. Collins, clear the room." Collins looked up, then down again. "Yes, sir." But before he could rise, the rear doors opened and a woman in a navy blazer entered carrying a slim case file beneath one arm. Her silver badge caught the overhead lights. Conversations died instantly. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need permission to cross any threshold. "Marion Holt, State Judicial Conduct Office," she said, voice even and unmistakably official. "Please remain seated." Pierce's face lost what color remained. "Ms. Holt," he said, forcing a smile that did not survive contact with his eyes. "This is highly irregular." "So are altered case records," Holt replied. The room went silent again. She approached the clerk's station first, not the bench, which somehow made the moment feel more severe. "Mr. Collins, step aside from the terminal, please." Collins obeyed immediately. His chair rolled back with a soft squeak that sounded louder than it should have. Holt opened her case file and removed printed screenshots. We received an anonymous complaint last night regarding unusual activity on this docket. We requested a preservation hold from County Information Services at 8:03 a.m. She glanced toward Emma, then back to the screen. Meaning all logs were secured before today's session began. Pierce straightened in his seat. This court will not be ambushed by administrative theater. Holt did not look at him. Then you should appreciate evidence. She tapped the monitor. At 7:42 a.m., user credentials assigned to Chambers accessed the Lawson file. At 7:44 a.m., the resolved status was reversed. At 7:46 a.m., contempt language was added. Murmurs spread like wind through dry leaves. A man near the back removed his hat. A woman who had laughed earlier now stared at the floor. Pierce's voice sharpened. Credentials can be shared. Holt nodded. That possibility was considered, which is why hallway camera footage was also preserved. Collins closed his eyes. Emma remained still, hands folded over her folder, as though she had already accepted this outcome long before anyone else understood it was coming. Pierce gripped the bench edge. This is political retaliation. Holt finally looked up at him. No, Judge Pierce. This is documentation. The words landed with the clean force of truth. She turned to Emma. Ms. Lawson, thank you for your patience. Emma inclined her head politely. I prefer records to arguments. Holt allowed the faintest smile, then addressed the room. For clarity, Ms. Lawson submitted supporting materials to our office at 6:15 this morning, including payment confirmations, archived portal screenshots, and postal verification records. Several heads turned toward Emma in open disbelief. The simple woman they had expected to crumble had prepared before sunrise. Pierce stared at her as if trying to rewrite the past 10 minutes in his mind. Who are you? He asked before he could stop himself. Emma met his gaze with the same calm she had carried all morning. Someone who believes institutions should deserve the trust they ask for. No one breathed. Holt closed her file. Judge Pierce, you are ordered to step down from the bench pending immediate review. The words echoed across marble and oak. Pierce did not move. For a man who had controlled every room he entered for years, he suddenly seemed to have nowhere to stand. For several long seconds, Judge Franklin Pierce remained seated beneath the state seal, hands fixed on the bench as if authority could still be held by posture alone. Then the meaning of Marion Holt's order reached everyone at once. The spectators who had entered expecting a routine humiliation now watched a man discover that titles could evaporate faster than pride. Pierce rose slowly. The robe that had once made him appear imposing now looked heavy, almost borrowed. This is unnecessary, he said, trying to recover the commanding tone that had ruled the room for years. Any concerns can be handled privately. Holt's expression did not change. Public misuse of public power rarely qualifies as a private matter. A low murmur moved through the gallery. Pierce looked toward the clerk, then the bailiff, searching for familiar loyalty. He found only lowered eyes. Mr. Collins stood pale and motionless beside the terminal. The bailiff shifted his weight but did not step forward. It was a strange thing to witness. A man surrounded by people and suddenly standing alone. Emma Lawson remained at the defense table, hands resting lightly on her folder. She neither celebrated nor smirked. Her restraint made the contrast sharper than any insult could have. Pierce noticed it and seemed to resent it most of all. You orchestrated this, he said, pointing toward her. You wanted a spectacle. Emma answered with the same calm that had dismantled his morning. No, Your Honor. I wanted accuracy. The spectacle was your idea. Several people in the back could not hide their reactions. One man coughed into his hand to cover a laugh. Another woman shook her head slowly, embarrassed that she had enjoyed the cruelty earlier. Holt stepped toward the bench. Judge Pierce, remove the robe and surrender access credentials. The words landed like final paperwork on a long overdue account. Pierce hesitated, then untied the collar clasp with stiff fingers. The rustle of fabric seemed louder than the crowd. He folded the robe once, then again, placing it on the bench where it no longer belonged to him. Without it, he looked smaller, older, less certain of where to place his hands. The state seal above him remained where it had always been, untouched by the person who once stood beneath it. Collins swallowed hard. "Your Honor, I never meant for any of this to happen." Pierce turned sharply. "You followed instructions." Collins's voice nearly failed him. "I should have followed the law." The room went silent. Truth often arrived late, but when it did, it carried weight. Holt accepted the keycard Pierce placed on the bench. "You will receive formal notice by this afternoon." Pierce gave a thin nod and stepped down from the platform he had ruled for years. Each step from the bench to the courtroom floor seemed to strip away another layer of certainty. As he passed the defense table, he paused beside Emma. For a moment, it looked as if he might offer apology, explanation, or one final threat. Instead, he said quietly, "Who trained you?" Emma looked up at him, steady and unreadable. "Life did," she replied. He had no answer for that. Pierce continued toward the side exit as cameras from 2 local reporters appeared in the doorway, summoned by whispers that had traveled faster than dignity returns. Flashing lights reflected across marble and glass. The former judge lowered his head and disappeared through the corridor. No one followed. Holt turned back to Emma. "Ms. Lawson, you are free to go." Emma gathered her papers carefully, as if this had been an ordinary errand completed before lunch. But as she moved toward the aisle, people who had watched in silence began to stand aside for her. Not because anyone told them to, because respect, once awakened, tends to make room. Outside the courthouse, the late morning air felt brighter than when Emma Lawson had entered an hour earlier. The stone steps were crowded now with reporters, courthouse staff, and curious onlookers drawn by the speed with which powerful stories travel when power changes hands. Microphones lifted, cameras angled forward. Questions flew before she reached the second step. "Ms. Lawson, did you know this would happen today? Are you an attorney? Will you file a civil complaint?" Emma paused beneath the tall columns and adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag. Her gray coat moved gently in the spring breeze. She looked less like the center of a public scandal and more like someone heading to buy groceries before noon. "I came to clear my name," she said. "Everything else belongs to the people responsible." The answer was simple, and because it was simple, it carried farther than drama would have. A few feet away, Marion Holt spoke quietly with state officers while courthouse administrators rushed in and out of the doors behind her. Inside, systems were being reviewed, locks were being changed, and years of unquestioned habits were suddenly being questioned. That was often how accountability arrived. Not with thunder, but with clipboards. Emma descended the final step and began walking toward the curb. A local reporter hurried beside her. "Ma'am, one more question. If you were not a lawyer, how did you know exactly what records to gather?" Emma stopped and considered the young woman's earnest face. "Because evidence does not care about job titles," she said. "And because some lessons stay with you." She continued on, leaving the reporter silent with her microphone lowered. Across town at Westridge High School, the lunch bell rang as students filled hallways with backpacks, laughter, and weekend plans. Principal Harold Stevens stood near the front office staring at the courthouse live stream on his phone. Tie loosened, expression stunned. He had warned Emma to stay quiet. He had suggested an apology might make things easier. Now he watched. The same teacher he underestimated walk through a storm with dignity he himself had not shown. "She is really Ms. Lawson?" a secretary asked softly. Stevens nodded once. "Yes," he said, though it sounded like he had just learned it too. In room 214, Emma's students had gathered around a classroom monitor left on by the substitute teacher. Jeremy, the same student who once asked why symbolism mattered, grinned so wide he nearly dropped his notebook. "I told you she was different," he said. Another student whispered, "She never even bragged." Their substitute, Mrs. Parker, folded her arms with admiration. "The strongest people usually do not." By 1:15, Emma pushed open the side entrance of the school carrying a paper cup of coffee and the same leather folder. No escort, no announcement, just steady footsteps through familiar halls lined with lockers and science fair posters. Students noticed first. Heads turned. Then whispers spread ahead of her like wind through leaves. By the time she reached room 214, 20 teenagers were standing before she touched the doorknob. Emma blinked in surprise. "Did I miss something?" she asked. Jeremy answered first. "Only justice, ma'am." Laughter filled the room, warm and relieved. Emma set her bag on the desk and looked at faces suddenly seeing her with new eyes. She could have told them about law school honors, about years of sacrifice, about why she chose teaching instead of courtrooms. She said none of it. She simply picked up a marker and wrote one sentence across the board in neat blue letters. Character is revealed when power is tested. The room went quiet, not from fear this time, but respect. Then she turned back to her students with the faintest smile. "Now," she said. "Where were we before everyone got distracted?" The afternoon settled over Westridge High School with the soft hum of fluorescent lights, distant locker doors, and the ordinary rhythm of a place where young lives kept moving no matter what happened in courtrooms downtown. Yet nothing felt entirely ordinary in room 214. Students sat straighter. Even the usual back row whisperers were attentive. Emma Lawson moved through the lesson on persuasive, writing with the same steady voice she had used before a judge, as if the morning had been no more disruptive than light rain. She asked questions, listened carefully, and wrote notes across the board in clean blue lines. If anyone expected triumph or anger, they found neither. She taught. That alone became its own kind of statement. Near the end of class, Jeremy slowly raised his hand. "Ms. Lawson," he said, "why did you never tell anyone you knew all that legal stuff?" Several students nodded. They had been waiting to ask the same thing. Emma rested the marker on the tray and considered the room. "Because knowledge is not jewelry," she said. "It does not become more valuable because you display it." The class fell quiet. She continued, "And because if people only respect you after they learn your resume, then they were never respecting you at all." A hush settled deeper than silence. Some lessons arrive louder than others. When the bell rang, no one rushed for the door. Backpacks remained on desks. Phones stayed in pockets. Teenagers who normally sprinted toward freedom lingered to hear one more sentence. Emma smiled faintly at the unusual miracle. "Go enjoy your afternoon," she said. "I promise grammar will still be here tomorrow." Laughter broke the tension and students finally filed into the hallway. Jeremy paused at the door. "You were incredible today." Emma shook her head gently. "No. Today records were incredible. I simply brought them." He grinned and left wiser than he knew. By 3:30, the campus had thinned into buses, car lines, and the distant sound of a marching band practicing on the football field. Emma remained at her desk grading essays beneath the warm glow of a small lamp. Papers were stacked in careful rows. Red pen marks curved through margins. There was something almost sacred in the return to routine after chaos. A soft knock came at the open door. Principal Harold Stevens stood there holding 2 cups of coffee and more humility than he had worn that morning. "May I come in?" he asked. Emma looked up and nodded. He stepped inside, placing 1 cup on her desk. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I assumed the easiest path was silence. I should have trusted your character." Emma folded her hands. "Most people confuse peace with avoidance," she said. "They are not the same." Stevens gave a rueful smile. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Say something that sounds simple and keeps echoing for hours." For the first time all day, Emma laughed. It was quiet and genuine. Stevens glanced around the classroom. Student essays on courage, fairness, and leadership covered the bulletin boards. "Why teaching?" he asked. "With your mind, you could have done anything." Emma looked toward the window where the late sun touched the empty parking lot in bands of gold. "I am doing anything," she said. "I get to help people become who they are before the world tells them who they are not." Stevens had no reply worthy of the moment. He only nodded. After he left, Emma gathered her papers and turned off the lamp. The room dimmed except for sunlight lingering through the blinds. She paused at the board where her earlier sentence still remained. Character is revealed when power is tested. Then she erased it slowly, not because it was untrue, but because tomorrow another lesson would need the space. And in towns like theirs, that is how real change often begins. Not with headlines, but with one honest person returning to work the next day. By the next morning, the town had done what towns always do when certainty breaks overnight. It talked. Coffee shops buzzed before sunrise. Grocery store aisles carried whispers louder than carts. At gas pumps and barber chairs, people repeated the same story with different details, each version trying to explain how a quiet literature teacher had walked into court alone and walked out with a judge removed from the bench. Some praised courage. Some criticized the system. Many simply admitted they had never looked twice at Emma Lawson before. That realization unsettled them more than the scandal itself. Westridge High felt the shift the moment first bell rang. Students moved through the halls with unusual purpose, not because teenagers suddenly loved punctuality, but because they wanted seats in room 214. By 8:10, desks were full and 3 students stood along the back wall. Pretending they preferred it that way, Emma entered carrying a canvas tote bag and a stack of essays. She paused at the sight of the crowded room. "Did guidance accidentally assign all of you here?" she asked. Laughter rolled through the class. "No, ma'am," Jeremy said proudly. "Word got out." Emma set the essays down. "Then let us hope grammar benefits from publicity." She began class with no mention of the courthouse, no reference to headlines, no invitation for applause. Instead, she wrote a prompt on the board. Describe a moment when truth changed the room. Pens moved immediately. Students who normally stalled now leaned over notebooks with urgency. Some wrote about family arguments. Some wrote about friendships repaired. One student wrote about seeing adults held accountable for the first time. Emma walked quietly between rows, reading a line here, encouraging a sentence there. Respect in the room no longer came from mystery, came from consistency. Midway through the period, the classroom door opened and Superintendent Dana Mercer stepped inside wearing a tailored navy suit and the cautious smile of someone entering territory she had not earned. The room stiffened. Emma turned politely. "Can I help you?" Mercer clasped her hands. "Ms. Lawson, may I speak with you in the hall for a moment?" Emma looked to her students. "Continue writing. Truth waits for no administrator." Several students nearly laughed out loud. In the hallway, Mercer lowered her voice. "I wanted to personally express concern for what happened yesterday." Emma regarded her calmly. Concern arrived late. Mercer exhaled. "Fair enough. There will be a formal review of district communication with the courthouse. We also wish to discuss leadership opportunities for you." Emma almost smiled. "Yesterday I was a liability. Today I am leadership material." Mercer's cheeks colored. "Circumstances changed." "No," Emma said softly. "Information changed. Character had already been present." The superintendent looked down the hall lined with student art and honor roll banners. "What would you like from us?" she asked at last. Emma's answer came without hesitation. "Protect teachers when they speak. Honestly, protect students when they ask hard questions. And stop rewarding people who confuse intimidation with competence." The hallway seemed to grow quieter around them. Mercer nodded slowly, hearing more truth in 30 seconds than some meetings produced in years. "I understand. That would be a good start," Emma replied. She returned to her classroom without ceremony. Students pretended not to stare. Jeremy raised a hand. "Everything okay?" Emma picked up her marker. "Yes," she said. "We are discussing revision." She underlined the word on the board. "Sometimes institutions need it too." The room broke into knowing smiles. Outside the windows, buses pulled in. Flags moved in the breeze, and another ordinary school day continued. Yet something invisible had changed. Young people had seen that calm could defeat arrogance, that preparation could expose power, and that the strongest person in the room is often the one who never needs to announce it. Emma looked across their faces and began the next lesson, knowing some victories are measured not in headlines, but in what others become after watching them. 3 days later, The courthouse story was no longer the only thing people discussed. The state review had widened. Local news stations now spoke about missing oversight, sealed complaints, and a pattern of citizens who had quietly paid fines rather than challenge a system designed to exhaust them. What began as one woman defending herself had become a mirror held up to an entire town. Some looked away. Others finally looked closer. At Westridge High School, Emma Lawson refused to become a celebrity in her own hallway. She arrived at 7:30 with a tote bag, a travel mug of coffee, and a lesson plan on rhetorical fallacies. She greeted the custodian by name, helped a student carry a science project through the front doors, and unlocked room 214 like every other morning. If victory had changed her, no one could see it. By second period, however, change arrived anyway. A district photographer appeared with Superintendent Dana Mercer and 2 board members, each carrying the polished expressions of people eager to stand near integrity after ignoring it. "Ms. Lawson," Mercer said brightly, "we would like to recognize your courage at next week's board meeting. Perhaps a photo for the district website." Students looked up from their desks. Phones quietly lowered. Everyone sensed a test. Emma set down her marker. "Recognition for what?" she asked. Mercer blinked. "For standing up to corruption." Emma folded her hands. "Interesting. When I needed support, I was advised to stay quiet. Now silence has become expensive, and suddenly courage is marketable." The room went still. One board member adjusted his tie. The photographer slowly lowered the camera. Mercer forced a smile. "We are trying to make things right." Emma nodded. "Then start with the students." She gestured toward the classroom. "Fund the library request denied last semester. Restore tutoring hours cut in January. Replace the broken air conditioning unit in room 118 before August. Put resources where applause usually goes." No one wrote that line down, but everyone remembered it. Mercer glanced at the board members, then back to Emma. "Those items can be reviewed." "That is the language of delay," Emma said softly. "I recommend the language of dates." A few students exchanged amazed looks. They had seen adults dodge accountability before. They had never seen someone calmly remove every exit. Mercer straightened. "Very well. We will return this week with timelines." "Then we will have progress," Emma replied. The officials left without a photo. As the door closed, Jeremy whispered, "That was colder than winter." Laughter spread across the room. Emma almost smiled. "No," she said. "That was clarity." After school, the district website posted a surprise announcement. Emergency approval for library funding, tutoring reinstatement, and immediate facilities repairs across campus. Reporters praised swift leadership. Teachers called it something else. In the faculty lounge, Principal Harold Stevens read the update twice before shaking his head with admiration. "She negotiated a school upgrade between second and third period," he muttered. That evening, maintenance crews measured vents in room 118 while librarians unpacked new shelves. Students walking home stopped to watch adults finally move quickly for the right reasons. In room 214, Emma erased the day's notes and stacked essays into neat piles. Jeremy lingered at the door. "Ms. Lawson, do powerful people always wait until they are embarrassed to do the right thing?" Emma capped the marker and considered the question. "Not always," she said, "but embarrassment is often faster than conscience." He nodded as if storing the sentence for life. When he left, the classroom fell quiet beneath the warm gold of sunset. Emma looked at the empty desks, the repaired clock on the wall, the future sitting invisibly in rows. Some people changed towns from podiums. Others changed them from classrooms. And the second kind usually lasted longer. 2 weeks later, summer light spilled across Westridge High School in long golden bands as the town settled into a new rhythm. Repairs were underway. Tutoring rooms were full again, and the library buzzed with students choosing books instead of excuses. Fresh paint brightened old hallways. New air conditioning units hummed where broken vents once rattled. People called it reform. Those who paid attention knew it began the moment one calm woman refused to be intimidated. In room 214, The final class of the year had gathered for presentations. Desks were arranged in a semicircle, papers stacked neatly, nerves hidden poorly. Emma Lawson stood near the board with a clipboard, listening as student after student spoke with more confidence than they had carried in September. Jeremy, once sarcastic and restless, now delivered a thoughtful speech on civic courage that earned real applause from classmates who had once laughed at effort. Emma wrote notes, asked questions, and praised substance over style. She never mentioned how much they had changed because she knew growth often shrinks when praised too loudly. After the bell, students lingered the way they always did when they sensed an ending mattered. One by one they thanked her, some awkwardly, some sincerely, some with eyes that said more than words could manage. Jeremy waited until the room had nearly emptied. "Ms. Lawson," he said, holding a sealed envelope, "my mom says thank you too. She said you helped me become serious." Emma accepted it with a smile. "That sounds dangerous." He laughed, then hesitated. "I got into State University." The words rushed out like they had been trapped for hours. "First in my family." Emma's eyes softened. "Then your family just changed forever." He swallowed hard and nodded. "You really think I can do it?" She looked at him the way only teachers who truly see people know how to look. "Jeremy, you have already done harder things. You learned discipline before applause. Keep that." He left carrying more confidence than when he entered. After school, the room grew quiet except for distant sneakers in the gym and the low murmur of custodians in the hall. Emma opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Jeremy's mother thanking her for believing in her son when others saw only trouble. Tucked behind it was a gift card to a local bookstore worth $20. Emma smiled at the tenderness of sacrifice. Some gifts carry numbers. Others carry meaning. That evening, the town council held a public meeting to announce ethics reforms, transparency rules, and new oversight procedures. Cameras attended. Speeches were made. Names were praised. Emma was invited and declined. Instead, she sat alone in her classroom updating next year's syllabus, adding a new unit on argument, evidence, and the responsibilities that come with authority. Outside her window, sunset washed the football field in amber light. Principal Stevens knocked softly and entered carrying a small plaque from the district. "Teacher of the Year," he said. "They insisted." Emma looked at the engraved plate, then at him. "Will it come with more copier paper?" Stevens laughed so hard he nearly dropped it. "I will see what miracles remain possible." He placed the plaque on a shelf beside dictionaries and staplers where it looked pleasantly unimportant. When he left, Emma turned off the classroom lights one row at a time. Shadows lengthened across empty desks. She paused at the doorway and glanced back at the room where futures had been repaired more quietly than any courthouse scandal. The world often celebrates the loudest victories, but the deepest ones happen where no cameras stay long enough to watch. A man once believed he could shame her because she looked ordinary. In the end, an entire town learned that dignity does not need an introduction, intelligence does not need permission, and the strongest people in the room are usually the ones who never need to prove it.